Okay, Dan's gone.
He's given up.
Dan left.
We were just chatting away too long. He's given up.
He said carry on. Yeah, he just was like, but he said not to leave, didn't he? Because otherwise the recording
Should we
doesn't
stop the
go.
recording though, and then it will?
No, I don't
are we
know.
able
Well,
to?
hang on. Should
Well,
we
he
mess
is
him?
still in the room.
Oh,
I
he
can
is.
see there's a fourth person. He's just switched his camera off. He says, no.
Hang on, hold tight. Yes.
Hold
no.
on tight. No, yes.
There you go. That's clear as day.
Rabbiting on, rabbiting on, rabbiting on, rabbiting on, rabbiting on.
It's unbelievable. They've let us back. It's season 2 of Rabbiting On, and I'm Rabbi Debbie Young-Summers.
I'm Rabbi Miriam Berger.
You nearly forgot who you were. And I'm Rabbi Robin Ashworth-Steen.
And for anyone joining us for the first time, a very, very warm welcome to Rabbiting On. So, girls, let's introduce Rabbiting On for those who might be listening for the first time. What's your favourite thing about season 1 of Rabbiting On?
Oh, I like that you called us girls. I don't think you ever called us girls before.
No, probably won't again.
Probably that'll be the last of that. It's just it's the tiredness of the High Holy Days. We're going to excuse everything that comes out wrong is just because we're all very tired. I just loved in the first series being able to chat with you two. It's just been I've just loved it. It's been a great highlight of my week. And I think with also having now started to travel around and go to London a little bit and meeting congregants more as they come back to shul, people listen and it's really helpful. And I know that some people have had, for example, around fasting on Yom Kippur, a couple of people got in touch to say how helpful it was for them and they're not able to fast, for example, with disordered eating or eating disorders. And someone's written a beautiful blog about it and said that our podcast was really helpful. Things like that, you think, amazing that we can have these conversations that are shared with others and we get to talk about them with people as well.
Except I always forget that these conversations are shared with others. So then people quote them back at me and I'm like, how do you know that? I was just talking to Debbie and Robin. I forget. But that's what my husband Johnny always says. Listening to the podcast is like having you over for dinner, but he can't get a word in edgeways. So I always think that sums
rubbish.
it up. Yeah. He's used to that.
Yeah, I think, we're all a little bit exhausted as we come together this morning. We've just finished the High Holy Days. But actually knowing I was starting off today with this crew was just so uplifting. And we do forget, I think, that there are listeners, but then we get all this feedback and people write in and it's so wonderful when we hear from our listeners and kind of learn about how it's impacted you or what else you'd like us to cover. So welcome and welcome back if you're here again. We are just really looking forward to being together again.
It's been a long time.
It has been when was the last episode?
May. It's been like the whole spring, summer, High Holy Days. That's a long time.
Too long. Although we did have a chance to actually see each other in person over the summer, which I think was the first time since we started making the podcast, and was, of course, the wedding of Cantor Zoe Jacobs, not anything to do with Rabbiting On. But that was super fun to see you both.
There was a groom, yeah.
There was a groom, yeah.
Zoe's wedding, and David.
Yeah. And David, yeah.
Oh, yes.
That was great fun to be together, wasn't it? And with Daniel Kane, we got great pictures of the night, all in our blues. It was great.
So when we're not at weddings, we are getting together every 2 weeks for a chat, and sometimes it's topical, sometimes we have a guest. And if you have suggestions for what you'd like us to have a think about, we love hearing from you. And we do have some exciting news coming up, don't we? What are we doing this series that we haven't done before?
Drum roll. Miriam doesn't look sure.
I realise I'm excited.
Yeah. We're going live. We're doing a live recording of the podcast on December the 1st, which I'm really excited about, with real people in a real room, having a proper chat. It's going to be great. And we're inviting back some guests and it will just be a great celebration, won't it? I still find, and I don't know about you for the High Holy Days, a great sense of blessing of when loads of people together. I'm still in pandemic mode. So when I take a moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're all in a room together. And I think it's going to be a bit like that on the 1st of December, particularly because we're only usually in this little space with us, that to be in a big space, it's going to just feel really fun, I think, and completely nerve-wracking, I reckon.
What were your High Holy Day highlights?
It's been an amazing journey, and there's the big highlights, the massive community moments. So we're really thinking about that piece of what does this High Holy Days need? So, 2 years ago, what we realized it needed was a safe way of people having their moment of being in community. And so we did the drive-in Rosh Hashanah service. And then last year we were like, what does it need? We need to be outside so that we can all be together, but as safe as possible. And so we were outside in a rugby stadium. And so there was a lot of conversation before this High Holy Days about like, what will people need? And what we realized was that kind of healing moment of what do you do with taking the kind of anxiety of I'm back and I'm in a room with all these hundreds of people, and what does it mean to feel both the sense of joy and the sense of sadness of those people who are not back in the room and the anxiety that's still around. And so to be able to kind of hold those two very different feelings. And so Cantor Zoe and Gareth Malone, the choir master extraordinaire, wrote a piece of music weaving two texts together that kind of held those two different voices. And Gareth kind of turned the community into a choir of 1,300 people in this kind of moment, both on Rosh Hashanah morning and again with the Torah out around the whole community on Simchat Torah. And so we kind of bookended the High Holy Days with these big moments to sort of hold 2022, I think, is a High Holy Days, again, different to all others. And hopefully by next year, we'll slot into a new normal. But I think that it needed kind of its time to be able to say, this, you can't just go into normal and think everything's fine again.
Yeah. Definitely think Miriam should have gone last. It's kind of like hard to follow with Gareth Malone leading 1,300 people up in Manchester in a smaller community. Yeah, it sounds amazing though. I would love to. I want to see the recording if there is one. Actually, it'd be great to hear. Great, I'll have a look. Yeah, so in we're about to, if anyone's heard this for the last 20 years, move from our building in Manchester. It's been a story for 20 years. We were actually moving. Our office are moving this week, and we're moving in. Our last service is the end of November in our building. So a lot of what we were doing was talking about endings, which works really well actually in the way that you were talking about, Miriam, of that kind of transitionary period that we're in or have come to the end of. I'm not sure. So it's a lot about beginnings involving endings, that they have to have an ending as part of it. Beginnings are hard. So having a bit of time for grieving, but also a bit of a time for looking forward. I have two moments that came to mind when you asked what my High Holy Days highlights were, which is hard to say quick. So first of all, there were loads of, on Simchat Torah, lots of firsts, and especially women having first moments religiously. So one of our members put on a talit for the first time. So she tried it the night before when she carried a scroll. She said, should I wear one? I said, it'd be great if you could. And she put one on, and then the next day decided to wear it for the whole service. And we said the Shehechianu blessing together on the bimah, and everyone sort of heard and joined in. And that was like joyous. And, what I want to be doing in the world is letting people have meaningful experiences with rituals and things. And then the second one, my favourite, was on Rosh Hashanah morning. We got all the kids to come up to blow the shofar with an amazing community shofar blower. And all the kids came up. It was brilliant. We all got them plastic shofarot, COVID safe and everything. But Gabriel, my son, thinks he's the best shofar blower in the world. And that morning he said to me, so which shofar blasts am I doing? Which I had not factored in at all, of him like doing a shofar blast, because it's not, anyway. So I was like, well, you can blow it with all the kids. You can have my shofar and all the kids will have their plastic shofarot. obviously all the kids come up onto the bimmer, and straight away, why has he got that chauffeur? Why can't I have that one? Why do we have these and he has that one? And I was like, well,
He's my son.
he's my son. He just gets favourite treatment. And then I was like, and that cost me £75. And they were like, whoa, this was all happening on the bimmer whilst we were meant to be doing the big moment. But I loved it because it was so like full of joy and kids. And then the kids at the end was like, and how long's left? Can we go yet? And it's just really fun because it was like the chaos on the bimmer at Rosh Hashanah. So yeah, really sad because lots of kind of grief about moving, lots of tears and lots of emotions very high actually because we feel very connected to our building. It's been, part of we've been there since the 50s, but actually it's a strange building. It holds a lot of power over us really. So a lot of goodbyes, but also a lot of joy coming back together. It was helpful there were so many people and then just looking forward to a refresh. So yeah, I feel really good actually coming out of Simchat Torah and now just getting on with the move and all together. It's good.
Our amazing youth and ed team for Rosh Hashanah created an apple orchard in our youth centre, which was our family service space. And for Yom Kippur, we went under the sea.
Hold on, you can't just say they created an apple orchard. Like how? What? That sounds amazing.
They hung apples and they created pepper trees. Oh. And we had like little sparkly tree things with baubles on and bees everywhere. And I managed to find an apple dress, which I was very excited about because I love a theme. And just seeing that kind of wonder, really, as people moved into that space. And then we went under the sea for Yom Kippur, and they created a little aquarium in one of the windows in the space. It was just very, very, very lovely. We had beer and shir with our young adults in the sukkah and just seeing people come back together because we've really been only successful on Zoom doing that for the last couple of years. This was the first time people really kind of came out in person and were there together. So I think a real sense of togetherness really over these days. And that was really amplified on Yom Kippur when sadly my senior Rabbi Mark lost his dad at 7 o'clock in the morning on Yom Kippur. And I think a lot of us have this tendency that had that happen to us on Yom Kippur, we would probably go into work because it's Yom Kippur and you need to. And I'm so pleased that Mark didn't. And he really took that time with his family. And I arrived at shul and everyone says, have you heard? I was like, no, what?
Oh, gosh.
But you know what? Everyone rocked up and did what they could do. And, our warden team stood up and took services and we had volunteers who went and read Torah in the family services where Rabbi Mark was meant to do it. And it was a real community sense. I didn't sit down all day, but, everyone really got involved. And on a really personal note through that day, my daughter had decided to come to shul with me and just to stay all day with me. And of course, she couldn't be with me most of the day because I'm doing things and on the bimmer. And she's only 10 and she found her way to just sort of finding the people she knew, sitting beautifully, following along. And when she needed a break, she went and did Lego in my office. And just having that sense of, she's starting to really get it was also really, really lovely.
Yeah.
I was fascinated. My son, off his own back, decided he needed to fast for the first time this Yom Kippur. And it was really interesting to see that thing of like them choosing their own path, taking on their own Judaism.
Eliana toyed with fasting until about 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah. Gabriel made it till breakfast.
There you go.
Great. He really tried and then he was like, I'm starving, and ate breakfast at the same time he always does. But that's fine. That's as it is. That sounds really beautiful, Debbie. I love that idea, like just the togetherness and how people step up in community is always astounding, isn't it? You think if you wrote it, you just think that's going to be a nightmare. And that Mark was also supported. Rabbi Mark was
and
also
obviously Mark did a
that.
huge amount in preparation. We knew it was a possibility and he had laid everything out ready. We knew where his sermon was so someone else could pick it up and read it. And when the need is there, people do get involved. And, I think the more people can do stuff and know that they're empowered is really wonderful as well.
is something very beautiful about death and Yom Kippur as well, and that kind of those coming together of those different kind of, you lay yourself so bare and you're so vulnerable as a community on Yom Kippur. We had a very involved member of the community who was in the hospice, and kind of we knew as a community that he and his children were listening on Zoom from the hospice, and sort of he was on the journey with us on Yom Kippur and died the following morning. And there is something extraordinary about how interlinked that sense is of this new year and this, what will this year be like? And knowing that there are some people that kind of won't be taking that step into the new year with us, but were so much part of us arriving at this time. Kind of, I feel there's a sense of kind of being held by them as this year progresses.
Yeah. And I think I always take from the High Holy Days, like, it's so spiritually intense. Like, not only is it physically and emotionally exhausting as clergy, but the greatest blessing I find of being clergy is that I can't not do the work. Like, I can't not do the spiritual work. I can't excuse myself and think, actually, I'm a bit tired today. I'm not going to go to shul. I'm whatever. I have to turn up. I have to read almost every single word of the prayers. I have to sing everything. And so you become so involved in the spiritual discipline of like that arc from Elul all the way to Simchat Torah. And I'm always amazed at like the release that it helps with in me of kind of going from deep reflection and then into kind of utter joy and abandon in Simchat Torah. And I think that's why I get so kind of wiped out at the end of it as well, because it's such a spiritually intense journey with it all. And I like last year had a really, really hard High Holy Days because, as you both know, and I wrote about online, I went through a miscarriage during the High Holy Days last year. So I think even more so, I kind of understood the festivals in a way last year than I ever had done. It was Rosh Hashanah, it was all good to go. Scans were looking hopeful. Yom Kippur, I was not fasting, but kind of getting into the intensity. And then it was at Sukkot with all the fragility of life, the impermanence of the sukkah that we found out with a 3-month scan. Baby hadn't survived. And then Simchat Torah had my surgery. And the nurse said to me, oh, I think she's trying to, like, you know, just calm you down a little bit. She said, what should you have been doing today? I was like, dancing with the Torah. And then I fell asleep or got knocked out. But so like reliving it this year, it was quite intense because of that, because it was quite visceral in a way that it might not have been if it was so attached to the calendar. But again, like the spiritual arc of the festivals was actually really important for me. Like you talk about, you know, death and how the festivals hold us in that. I really felt there was some sort of release, or being able to be with it and process it through that time was really powerful. So I do think like the greatest blessing is that I just have to keep turning up to shul, even when I'm not in the mood. And it's just so helpful.
And that piece, that actually, that reminder that the High Holy Days are different every year. Whoever you are, whatever you're going through, that you look out into the world differently. And so the services might be very, very similar every year. The rituals are the same. And yet we experience them so differently. We had a moment on Yom Kippur morning where Melinda Simmons, the British ambassador in Ukraine, was called up for the Aliyat Torah, and she'd accepted the mitzvah whether I might be on Zoom, I might be in person, sort of, you know, it really depends. And it came to the last moments as to whether she would actually be able to get a flight out of Ukraine to be on the Bima on Yom Kippur morning, which she was, which was an extraordinary community moment to be able to have this kind of stark realization of whatever is going on in our lives, that big picture stuff globally, and our own personal journeys and the parts that we play, and being able to raise up people who are playing extraordinary roles in community. There is something about that reminder that everything is temporary, and however, whatever we're experiencing, when we're experiencing it, please God, it feels only like a short chapter, and that, you know, the High Holy Days remind us new chapters open, that kind of, as soon as we finished reading Torah, we start again. There's always a starting again. And please God, the starting again will be a positive one.
Yeah. It's really interesting, Robin, you spoke about that sense of the arc of spirituality for yourself, I think quite often as rabbis, it's very easy for our own spirituality or Judaism to somehow be put to the side so that we can facilitate everyone else's to some extent. Certainly our families get put to the side for that. But I remember one of our community's emeritus rabbi now, Rabbi Danny Smith, used to, maybe he still does, used to go and spend a day in a nunnery or a monastery, davening the entire liturgy of Yom Kippur over the summer holidays, getting his own sense of what it is to work through those prayers done before he had to do it for everybody else. Do you use your summers to prepare in that way, or do you try and relax and go away and do other things, or is it a bit of both?
My gosh, I love that. So that's amazing. I've not heard that before. It's an amazing story. This year, actually, I had 5 weeks off. I had 3-week mini sabbatical and then 2 weeks on holiday. And I used my sabbatical to prepare for the High Holy Days, which I think I'm going to do again. It was brilliant. I never usually do it in that kind of way, but I was in such a good headspace because I was only doing that and then with Gabriel or, doing whatever. And so I kind of wrote out my kavanot and all bits and pieces. And because I'm so tired, we're all so tired when you get to the actual festivals. I find preparing within that space, it becomes content, not art. I lifted that from somewhere else. But when I was doing it in the summer, in that kind of spaciousness, I was able to connect a bit more, probably in the way that Rabbi Danny did in that way. And then I went to Greece for 2 weeks, all inclusive, and just ate and swam, and it was amazing. And also had the best rabbinic highlight so far of my 5 years, that I did a wedding for a gorgeous couple. Shout out to Charlie and Hannah. I did a wedding in Ibiza, which was amazing. Ibiza's so cool. And the wedding was beautiful. The family and friends were gorgeous. And that was kind of going into the High Holy Day season. So if anyone would like a wedding in Ibiza, I am available the end of next summer. Please do be in touch with producer Dan.
Is he
I did a wedding in Ibiza about a decade ago. Did one about a decade ago in Ibiza. And I remember flying out on some very cheap airline at 5 o'clock in the morning, and everyone else on the flight was not of a sober mind, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is this place that I'm going to? It's going to be insane. And actually only part of the island is Party Island.
Exactly.
There's this beautiful nature reserve space, and it's a stunning place.
I'm going back. I was completely sold. It's just beautiful. How was your summer, Miriam? So now I've done the back, you had Gareth Malone and the ambassador to Ukraine, and I went to Ibiza. So I'm now I'm passing it to you.
Right. And it's really interesting. I'd love to say I spent the summer preparing for the High Holy Days. But actually I find so much of it. I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about on Kol Nidre until I'd heard the Rosh Hashanah sermons that my colleagues gave. And then I was like, actually, this is not what I want to say on Kol Nidre, and kind of ended up within the 10 days, kind of starting again, changing my message for the High Holy Days completely. So I think there's something about, it's also so live and so in the moment that there's that piece that's around kind of the flexibility. Although we did go away much earlier in the summer than we normally do, and of course the High Holy Days were not nearly as early as they were last year, a whole month later, and therefore it felt like much more of a sort of a calmer re-entry into the High Holy Days than it has done for the last couple of years, especially as I think for the last couple of years we've also been kind of every moment, what's the new reality going to be, so much that any preparation felt like it could be whipped from under you at any moment. So getting back to that thing of actually these are something that you can sort of prepare for has been helpful. But I have to say, I would really love to have learnt over the 2 years of COVID where we didn't travel at all for 2.5 years that I learned that we didn't need to leave the country. But actually, I didn't. I did quite the opposite and realized that there was something about being in the same time zone throughout that for basically 3 years that I didn't switch off. I didn't stop. And even when we were away for the summers that we were able to be, it felt like I could nip back. It felt too close. I was too present. And we had a couple of weeks in Canada, which was just wonderful and felt like the first real kind of family time. It seems ridiculous that we spent 2 years in the house, the three of us all together all the time. And yet we needed to be thousands of miles away to actually go, we're now just the family. And the three of us had a really, really lovely time. We were traveling constantly around Canada. We only spent like 2 nights in any one place. But what an amazing country. And what I learned was everyone should be more Canadian. They're just such nice people. So real, so authentic, so warm, so kind. If the world was a little bit more Canadian, I think it would be a better place.
It's like that in Manchester, by the way. It's just because you live in London.
Fair enough.
But Canada is, I'm also a big fan of Canada. Yeah.
I think it also takes time to switch off. Like the first few days of being away, you're still not away. It takes me a really long time to completely switch off.
I'm always incredibly, incredibly grumpy the first day we're away and the day before we go. I find the transition, because there's just something that's really odd about the shift of perspective and just the change of routine. And then it's just amazing, can release a lot.
I think it also comes from genuinely caring. So like I genuinely care about the members of my community. I'm not just like rocking up to a hospital or making that phone call because I'm paid to, because I'm the rabbi. I genuinely care about my members. And therefore there does seem a little bit of that feeling of, I sometimes feel like, well, am I deserting everybody? Am I just leaving? And so there's that getting out of that headspace as well and saying, it is okay.
And actually, if we don't have that downtime and that switch off, then we can't continue.
And I have
to
amazing
care for
colleagues.
everyone.
Like it's not like I'm really deserting anybody. They're in fabulous hands with a wonderful team. It's about me and my need rather than anybody else's. Debbie, what about your summer? Were you preparing for the high days, or did you actually get a break?
I did get a break. We had our first trip abroad since pre-COVID. We went to Spain for 10 days. I think I need to get better at holidaying. I don't think I'm very good at it. It was not the rest that I hoped it to be. Although, there were lovely moments. I think it's now our top skill is messing up going to the beach. We, Gary, my husband, found this gorgeous beach that was an hour and a half away. We were on the Costa del Sol, so there are lots of beaches. He found one an hour and a half away that's like the perfect beach. So we drove for an hour and a half to this perfect beach, and we left in glorious sunshine, and when we got there it was drizzling and windy. We're just like, what is going on? So we sat on the beach for about an hour, and then the sun came out, and we had our sandy lunch, and after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I was like, it's too windy, the sea's not fun, let's go back. And then another day we went to a beach that was much closer, and it was so windy our parasol kept flying away and trying to decapitate people, so we're kind of sitting there huddling, holding on to our umbrella. It was very Brits on holiday. It was terrible.
I did a teaching session for the staff of Anthony Nolan. Big shout out to the life-saving charity that they run, and was teaching about Tishri festivals, why so many of their Jewish colleagues were off work for so many days, and was talking about Sukkot. And one of the people that worked there was talking about his love of camping, and how when you look up at the stars in the way that I was talking about being able to through the roof of the sukkah, he was talking about that, as coming from a non-religious background, that thing of sitting outside when the nights that you're camping, that you can't fail to connect with something bigger. And even if you don't have religious language for it, there's something about being outside in an area of the world that's not kind of got all the light pollution of nearest cities, and actually being able to look up and see the stars and connect with something bigger and see yourself really as the kind of, you acknowledge that you are but dust and ashes kind of thing. And so it was an interesting insight into another way of looking at it.
And I think the freedom that our certainly as families, the freedom you can give your kids when you're camping is so precious, because actually there's a lot of rigidity in our world for them, and a lot of routines and rules and uniforms. And, you know, on a campsite, I'm generally quite happy for them to just go off, find the playground, do their thing.
Meet other kids.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really special
I'm nodding
thing.
away. I've like never camped as a family. I'm like
Come
nodding
with
and I'm
us. We
like,
should have a
I
rabbiting
love
on
hotels.
camp. Miriam in
I
her
like
heels.
hotels. No, but hotels are lovely because you don't have to do anything, and it's like so nice not to have to cook, and you get a posh bathroom, a lovely comfy bed. Like
So
that's what I love about going away.
I think I'm an and in this moment because
Okay.
We have what we call our glamping friends, and you know, when I say glamping, we have got an ensuite toilet, which is like the bottom line, and electricity, so you can keep your mobile phone
we get hookups
connected.
as well.
You know, those kind of things. There's levels of this, and I'm certain. But we go away with the same 3 other families once a year glamping, and there's nothing more relaxing in the kids just being able to entertain themselves. I'm yet to find a hotel that would give you that freedom where the kids can just be themselves and you're not worried about anybody else, you know, disturbing anybody else. And it doesn't matter how late it is. And there is something amazing about sitting around a campfire, making s'mores and singing and having your guitars out. And you know that I love it.
And
but
breakfast
hotel
outside.
breakfast, and
Nothing
there's nothing
like
better
it.
than a hotel breakfast.
Well, I don't know. I
recreate
think
that
breakfast
glamping.
cooked on a outdoor stove in
Hotel
the, you know,
buffet
still in your pajamas. I love it.
Hotel buffet breakfast.
Did either of you have any mad holiday disasters, or was it all plain sailing?
It's never plain sailing, is it? Like family holidays. And that's part of the fun of it, I think. Ours was relatively plain sailing, apart from on the way back. I think because of post-Brexit, who knows? Like the queues were crazy in, you know, airports. Manchester particularly was going through a tough time. Gabriel got a vomiting bug on the day of travel on the way back. So I was like queuing. Anthony had to keep running back to the toilet with him. And it was fun. So like Gabriel had a really hard trip back. It was really gross and horrible for him. But what was funny was we went to this very nice hotel and it's like all inclusive and everything. And we were like, oh, we could go back there because it was very easy and it was really like fun. And Gabriel was like, I don't think I want to go back because I got food poisoning from it. And I was like, that's the whole holiday. You know, you spend loads of money on a massive holiday. It's great. And Gabriel's like, I got food poisoning. I shall not be going back to that place. You know, that's what you're taking away from 10 days in a beautiful hotel. But he was convinced that was, you know, it wasn't. He didn't get food poisoning. He just got a bit of a bug or whatever. But that was, a kind of. But all family holidays, always, you know, arguments, aren't there? Because you're getting stuff out of your system. I think it's quite
thank God it's not
important.
just us.
Oh no, all the time. But I think you have to play these things out, like you say, and then you kind of settle into it and you find a different way of being. That's always flavoured throughout it. And also I love being at the airport and you see all the other families bickering with each other and being rude to each other. And Anthony and I always turn around and go, okay, let's try harder with each other. Because when you see it within other people, you always think, oh, it looks really ugly. Like it doesn't, and you know you do it and it's like a mirror. So I always loved that. Every airport we were in, we saw people like friends, family, whatever, arguing with each other. And it was like, okay, we need to.
Our first argument at Gatwick was that they had a room of prayer and Gary hadn't done shacharit yet, hadn't done morning prayers, but the room of prayer was before security. And we all know that security has been a nightmare this time. So I'm like, no, you are not going in that room of prayer. You are coming through security. And this poor boy, all he wanted to do was go and put his tefillin on.
And what happened?
Who won?
He came through security. It was super fast. And then he did it in the
Was
middle
there
of the
another
airport.
room at the other side of security? No.
No.
Shame.
No.
Oh, well, that's something to think about if anyone's listening from that airport, to have a room of prayer at the other side to save make family trips easier.
We always tell the same story when we're at any airport now. We have to tell the muffin story because it reminds us of those families and not to be that family, right? Very, very early in a fast food outlet trying to buy some coffee and kind of breakfast, and mother and child in front, child crying. And going, but you said I could have a muffin. And the mum's going, I've got you a muffin. I wanted a muffin. There's your muffin. I've got you a muffin. I wanted a muffin. And the mum's going, I've got you a muffin. The mum's screaming expletives at this poor child who's crying more and more, going, I just wanted a muffin. And there's just this piece of me, like, at what point do I then go, I think she means a chocolate muffin, and you're talking about a breakfast egg muffin. They're really different. I really didn't want to be on the end of the wrath of this scary woman who I was terrified on behalf of the child, but the child did not have the language to say, you've called this a muffin, but it doesn't look like... She wanted a cake. It was very funny. So we always
we
tell
all?
that story as if to be like, however early it is and however, tetchy one is at the airport, never turn into the muffin mum, because we all have tendencies to become that person.
Oh, I've been that person. Yeah, exactly. It's why when you see it mirrored to you, right. That's what actually my Yom Kippur sermon was all about.
Muffins?
Culinary sermon was all about that. It was not about muffins, but it was about the muffin lady, actually, like, as it turns out, all about anger and like that evil inclination of like how easy it is to step into it. And it's because a congregant had said to me in the summer, anger is easier than grief. And I thought, so powerful. There's something like anger is easier to go to than actually dealing with the reality of we're all a bit tired. It's like hard work. Let's turn to compassion or whatever it is, like, going down to their level. What do you mean? Let's talk it through type thing or whatever it is. But yeah, so there you go.
That's really interesting. My Yom Kippur sermon last year was about anger
There's a lot of it
and
about
forgiveness as well. This year I went for basically people are complicated and it's never as simple as we think. And I while I was on holiday, I read Sandy Toksvig's book about her father's life in Denmark during the Second World War. He was a young boy. It's actually written really for kind of tweens and teens. It's a beautiful book. I'd really recommend it. Really easy read. Denmark rescued like 98% of their Jewish community. It's this incredible story of heroism. But Sandy Toksvig keeps saying in the book, not all the Danes did the right thing. Not all the Danes were good. And actually a lot of the German soldiers assisted us and didn't check properly and weren't all bad people, and this kind of sense of how complicated life is. And then on the way out after Kol Nidre, we try and get to the door to say goodbye to everyone and meet with people. 3 different congregants told me that their families were saved by those Danish boats. And it was so moving. I hadn't expected that at all. But yeah, my Yom Kippur takeaway was, from my sermon at least, was people are complicated.
Yeah.
How about you, Miriam? What's your one-line takeaway?
Really about hope and about relationships, and that it's those interactions between people that give us that sense of hope and kind of an acknowledgement that it will get easier. We don't discuss, we each give a sermon over the High Holy Days. I know those people who have to give like 5 hate our big teams where we each only need to give 1, but basically we only speak once kind of properly over the High Holy Days. And it turned out that both the Rosh Hashanah morning sermons were pretty hardcore, kind of depressing, isn't the world in a terrible place? And so it felt like we need to, and I had thought about, and I was going to be talking about fear. And I was like, actually, I need to twist that and change and pivot, and had ended up having an incredibly moving conversation with the daughter of the member in the hospice when I had gone to visit between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And actually, it's amazing where we take that inspiration from, but that bedside conversation allowed me to sort of pivot the sermon very into a more hopeful space.
I definitely think there's something about not preparing Yom Kippur sermons too early, because you really don't know what's going to happen in those 10 days.
Well, I learned
9/11 happened really close to the High Holy Days, and life changes really fast.
Yeah.
What I want to hear Miriam's mistake.
No, as a rabbinic student, it was 9/11 when I started at college. And I'd been invited to give a sermon at a synagogue, and it was basically my first kind of proper sermon. So I'd written it weeks in advance, and the rabbi said to me, "You've written your sermon, just give the sermon." And I have to say, I think it was like a terrible piece of advice, because people had come, they'd just experienced this horrific trauma of 9/11, and I was talking as if it hadn't happened, because it hadn't happened when I wrote my sermon, and I've never quite got over it, because I did what I was told to do, but I knew as soon as I'd done it, I shouldn't have done it. And I realized what actually he was saying was, don't try and make meaning from 9/11. I'm not expecting your first sermon to be the sermon that you can give words to this. And yet not even trying, I think was even worse. And I think I learned that we don't always have to have the right words, but we need to be able to share the lack of words sometimes, rather than make synagogue a place where we pretend it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
It's interesting. A lot of people ask me about kind of recycling and reusing stuff, because obviously I've only been in this role 3 years and I could still be using stuff from the 10 years before that in the rabbinate. But so often I think what you've said before doesn't really work now because things are different and it's changed. And I had this was much more personal rather than the community experiencing it, but I had a friend who died tragically young in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur when I was a student rabbi. And I remember saying to the person who organised our placement, I just don't know if I can go up and go and be a rabbi in this community. And there's so much grief and I don't know how to hold my own grief. And they're like, you'll manage, you'll be fine, you're going. And I went, and my Yizkor sermon obviously was all about my friend and the ways that Teshuvah, Tzedakah and Tefillah had been embodied by her. And, no one in the community had experienced her or knew this life, but actually because it was coming from a real place in me, it worked. And I think we do have to always be real and responding to what's actually going on rather than just saying, occasionally it is possible to recycle and that is super useful. But on the
sometimes
whole,
I worry I'm recycling without even knowing, right? Because we probably say the same thing.
We all have 5 sermons,
every
right?
few years, right? Like I'm probably saying the same thing. I just think I've written it new because I've opened a new Word document and started typing something new, but not always a new thought, I'm sure.
Yeah, I had that experience this year. It's when I realised I'd written something similar, but it still felt very relevant. But it's because, as Debbie said, we've all got kind of 1 or 2 sermons basically in us that we're talking to.
5, maybe 5.
Maybe 5. But I definitely think I'm realising more and more that the role of a rabbi is 2 things. But one of the things I think is being witness and witnessing what's going on and being able to talk to it, not giving answers to it, but to talk to it. So I find often my Yom Kippur sermon, I can't write until I've done Rosh Hashanah and I've actually seen everybody. And one of our colleagues said a great thing that he kind of looked up on Rosh Hashanah and was like, oh, there you are. And, I see you in a way that, because we've been in such different worlds, and it's only then that you actually get to kind of encounter in a deep way and witness as well. Yeah.
Well, that is almost it for today. But before we go, we really, really want to thank the powers that be at the Reform Judaism Movement Towers. They're having us back for this second round of Rabbiting On. And we're just really, really grateful that they've given us the opportunity to continue and that we've got your attention, that you're here with us listening and joining the conversation, we hope. So thank you for joining us if you've made it this far.
While you're talking about RJ, Debbie, can I put in a plug for the Honeycomb Project?
Please.
It's an extraordinary way of being able to volunteer in your community, but also feel that you've been given and tooled up with some really important skills in some of the pastoral work you might think can only be done by clergy. But actually that relationship between member to member and being able to hold and support and really listen to people is something that can be done, I'm sure, by anyone with the right training and with the right insights. So there's still a few spaces on that course. It's joint with the Reform and Liberal movements and is a wonderful course of training. Begins on the 2nd of November. And if you want more information, you can go to reformjudaism.org/honeycomb.
And hopefully there'll be a link in the show notes as well for anyone who wants to find out more about that. As ever, MRJ is hugely busy behind the scenes, quietly and efficiently working to bring us all together as different communities with all our different approaches, supporting our youth and ensuring that where it counts, our values are being represented and heard. But all this praise and joking aside, we also really want to thank our production team who are out there ready to respond to all of your emails and texts. So please feel free to send them your innermost thoughts, or just a hello. We love hearing from you. Let us know what you'd like out of this second round of Rabbiting On.
And when can people start booking tickets for our live show at JW3?
Oh, yeah.
It's a great question. I'm not actually sure, but I'm sure we will let them know when booking opens. But you can email our producers and get through to us via media@rjuk.org, or you can text and WhatsApp. I hope you've got your phones ready to get the number down. It's +44, which is for the benefit of our international listeners. We do have some of those too. So +44 7922 575 583. I don't know that responses will be instantaneous because people do have to rest and sleep, but do get in touch. And hopefully in the next few weeks, we will be able to tell you exactly how you can not only listen, but be present with the conversation when we go to JW3 and begin the reach of our tentacles across the global media empire that Rabbiting On has its sights set on. But we will be back in a couple of weeks with lots more chat, as well as that news on how to book for JW3. And it's just so lovely being back with Rabbi Miriam and Rabbi Robin and with all of you. And we hope to see you soon.
Lovely to chat to you.
Bye.
Rabbiting, 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 rabbiting on, rabbiting on.
That was fun. I enjoyed that conversation.